Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin shortly. While you come in the room, you can introduce yourself in the general chat box, and we'll begin soon. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining our event today on self-care in overwhelming times. Ken Kraybill from C4 Innovations will be leading today's event. I'll be turning things over to him shortly, but first I'd like to review a few housekeeping items with everyone. If you're having any technical or audio difficulties, please email us or let us know in the chat. Participant microphones will be muted. We do encourage the use of the general chat box for introductions and comments. If you have any questions regarding the topic, we ask that you use the Q&A box above the chat. This event is being recorded and it will be available for viewing tomorrow on our website, along with the slides and any additional resources discussed today. If any questions arise after the event, you can again email us at newengland@mhttcnetwork.org. Our mission is to use evidence-based means to disseminate evidence-based practices across New England. Our area of focus on recovery is done through recovery-oriented practices and support services within the context of recovery-oriented systems of care. To ensure the responsiveness of our work, we will actively develop and maintain a network composed of different stakeholders from each of the 6 states to guide our activities. And to learn more about us and access our numerous webinar recordings and resources, please visit our website. I'll also put the website on the chat. And with that, I will hand it off to Ken.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm delighted to be with you all. I'm looking in the general chat box and I'm noticing that you're coming from all over the country. It's good to see that Colorado and Texas and Missouri are here in the house. I didn't realize you were all part of New England, but maybe you're not. But anyway, thank you for being here. I'm delighted to do this and to also just start by saying thank you for all of the good support that you are currently providing to clients you work with your colleagues, and recognize that during these times we've had to shift our ways of helping, and At the same time, I think it raises some new opportunities. So thank you for all you're doing from most of you probably from your homes, although probably not all of you. And I do recognize that in terms of behavioral health, these are certainly times when clients are undoubtedly experiencing increased anxiety, depression, more suicidal thinking, perhaps attempts. We know that interpersonal violence is on the rise, especially in domestic situations, a rise in psychosis and substance use. And so all of these things are exacerbated by the traumatic times in which we're living. So I appreciate all you're doing. And today is really an opportunity for us to talk more about you and less about our clients, but we can't not keep them out of the equation either. I need to tell you something, a confession. I am not a self-care expert. I haven't written books about this, but I do read the books, and I do my own self-care in my own faltering ways. And so in many ways, I'm a curator of things that I see out there and things I learn from other people about how do we care for ourselves while caring for others, and how do we do that in the best of times, not to mention in overwhelming times. So what I do know is that all of you also are already doing a lot to provide self-care, self-compassion. And so I'm going to invite you to use the chat box to share whatever wisdom and questions you might have to have a conversation with each other during this time. I will likely not be able to see everything that comes up in the chat, nor will I be able to respond to everything, but what I do hope is that you can be consultants to one another and also form a virtual community in that way. I will say that for those of you who might have interest in staying on after the top of the hour for this, we'll leave the chat box open for a few extra minutes if you want to add some additional wisdom or make any comments. So just so you know that that's coming. So let's go ahead and just remember why we're here. And as advertised, this is really a time of acknowledging the really hard and difficult and overwhelming times we're in. This is no secret to anyone, but we know that our own stress, fear, anxiety, grief, all of these things which are a part of our lives in general do get heightened during this time. And so we'd like to explore in general a few questions having to do with what is it that we're experiencing? How do we wrap our heads around that? How do we name it? What are the practices that can keep us healthy in body, mind, and spirit? And then how do we continue our ability to provide gentleness to ourselves, with each other, and compassion for one another and others? I certainly have seen in myself, and I'm guessing you might have seen in yourselves, a little bit of heightened irritability, maybe a heightened sort of desire to jump to judgmentalness. I don't know, I can't say for you, but I can say for me that that's all there. But it's all coming from a place of anxiety, I believe, and so we just want to be aware of that. I want to just share this quote. This comes from a book by Laura Vandernoot Lipsky called The Age of Overwhelm. Some of you may know her from a previous book she wrote entitled Trauma Stewardship. But she had a conversation with Archbishop Desmond Tutu from South Africa, and she asked, what do you do in times of despair? And his simple and very profound answer, I thought, was, you show your humanity. And I think that it's tempting to, and I'm sure he means hopefully the best of your humanity, but I think it's also true that we sometimes show the shadow sides of our humanity too, and that's okay. But we really do want to show the best of ourselves. And there's good research to suggest that during times of crisis and emergencies that people do bring out their best behaviors. There are some exceptions to that, but these are times where I'm sure you have seen too, where people are extraordinarily generous and going out of their way to assist others and reaching out to one another and all of those things. So showing our best humanity is a good starting point here. I do want to say a few things that I feel like are important to say. And one is that most of us on this call probably are living with a roof over our head, with adequate food to eat, with running water, with access to the internet, some basic things that we often take for granted. But that actually puts us in a place of some privilege, relatively speaking, just because worldwide this pandemic is having such horrible effects on so many people's lives. And so I don't want to underestimate the kind of overwhelm that each of us is experiencing, including myself. But I think it's worth saying that there are many of us who live with relative privilege. And to take that a step further, if you are a black and brown-skinned person, we know that just because of causes and conditions, there's a greater likelihood that you'll get the virus, that folks will die from it. We know from Louisiana that black people represent 32% of the population, and yet 70% of the COVID deaths are among black people. The same is true in Wisconsin, the same is true in Michigan, and probably in every other state in which we live. But we have pretty dramatic stats around that. This is a quote from an article from The Guardian, and I thought it was well said. And basically they said, save us the platitudes of coronavirus as the great leveler. Abandon this sickly myth that we are all in this together. For some, this is a time of grand inconvenience, undoubted stress, and self-evident loss of freedom. But for others, it's a time of national and personal disaster, a present defined by a turmoil and future snatched away. Coronavirus is not a great leveler. It is exacerbating inequality right now. So I'll leave that stand for itself. And just to poke into that a little bit more, one could say that we're living in a time of apocalypse, but maybe not in the way that many people think of apocalypse. I know often the media and movies and everybody sort of portrays apocalypse as this crazy battling end of times event. But really, apocalypse, when we look at it from the original Greek, really calls to have us look at it as an unveiling or uncovering or revelation of what is, kind of pulling the curtains back, pulling back the veil on the realities of what is, and the inequalities, the class divisions, the race divisions, and all of that. And so in a time of apocalypse, interestingly, it's also a time of opportunity, I think, for us to really think about how can we change the course of the future by recognizing that, for example, the mass uninsurance in America is really a perverse form of helping people when we only do it through employer-based health care, or the deepening economic crisis. We have to recognize that so much of the market economy is based on the political, not on the actual reality. And then, of course, we can remind ourselves, too, that what happens in the time of crises like this, people have said everybody becomes a little bit socialist because we start recognize the common need and the common good that we all experience and how we can respond to that. And so I only put this out here to suggest to us that this is a time of both uncovering, but a time maybe of recovering some of that humanity in future policies. We'll see if that happens. So focusing back on you, I'm going to guess that some of you have mixed feelings about being here today. I will say that I'm one of those people who I'm not real inclined to go to workshops on self-care. I've been to enough that have fell short of expectations, I'll say. And hopefully this won't be one of those. But there's a good chance that we're ambivalent for a variety of reasons. One is maybe that you're just feeling so tired and stretched thin that you don't even have bandwidth to consider this kind of stuff. Or you're one of those people who says, I don't do bubble baths. That's not my thing. And I guess this is just a way of saying that sometimes we think of self-care as solely about being self-pampering. And while that can be a helpful part of all of this, it's so much more than that as well. Some of you might be just saying, I need a good cry more than a webinar right now. And it's interesting. For some of us who aren't necessarily criers, it's harder to cry because we're putting our feet down and trying to get through the day. But I found certainly for myself that a good cry is something that really is helpful in releasing. But self-care is still more than that, of course. And then I'm guessing many of you have no interest in having me or anybody else tell you to take away your simple pleasures in life, even if there may be the not most healthy things that you can do for yourself. For me, it would be switching to non-dairy ice cream. It's just a horrible idea to even consider. But some of you probably have some other thoughts about that, too. And then another reason you might be ambivalent is self-care is hard, and nobody ever really talks too much about that. It does take a sense of responsibility, a sense of being organized, and some persistence and planning. And yet, it doesn't have to be horrible. But here's someone who is talking about self-care. And Maury Patton says, what social workers and other people don't often tell you is that self-care can be completely terrible. Self-care includes a lot of adulting and activities that you want to put off indefinitely. And then she goes on to say that self-care is about making hard decisions, prioritizing, deciding what to let go of as well as what to embrace. And it also involves asking for help. So the irony of self-care is that rarely can we adequately care for ourselves without being in relationship and in supportive relationships with others. And so I think this is a good reminder along the way. So I want to offer some ideas around self-care practices and some practical examples, and I'm framing them loosely around ideas of self-care practices that promote awareness, those that promote a sense of balancing act, if you will, and those that promote connection. And obviously they all interweave, so it's not a linear process. But let's first look at some of the ones related to awareness. So my guess is that most of you have experienced a slowdown in your lives. A slowdown because we don't have as many activities that we can be engaged in these days. We can't go places like we used to. We can't do a lot of things. And so we're homebound, most of us, a lot of the time. But it gives us an opportunity to slow down our bodies, our minds, our busyness, and the frenzy of our schedules. Although I'm sure there's another level of busyness that's taking over. But nonetheless, I do think that when we think about self-care, it does involve slowing down. It does involve calming ourselves and having an opportunity to think, not just do. And so that's a gift, I think, that we are being offered at this point in time. And we talk often about mindfulness as a way of taking advantage of that slowing down. And mindfulness is one of those things that is used in a variety of different contexts. But really mindfulness is defined in one way by Jon Kabat-Zinn as the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. That's a lot, and I think we're all recognizing for ourselves these days and in the past that we tend to go towards judgmentalness pretty quickly. We tend to live more in the past and in the future more than in the present oftentimes. We often aren't paying attention. We're not listening well. We're not noticing what's going on. And so, again, mindfulness brings us an opportunity to exercise being here in the moment. So the question might be, are you mindful or are you mindful? And probably we're all a little bit of both. So mindfulness is also sometimes referred to as Be Here Now. Some of you will recognize that as a book that was written by Ram Dass, who died this past December, and again was an early introducer, if you will, of this whole notion of finding our ability to be present in the here and now. So I have an activity that I'd like to invite you into, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just read a few lines. This is actually an activity adapted from Marsha Linehan's dialectical behavioral therapy training, skills training book. And so I know many of you are familiar with DBT and may know this exercise. I've modified it a bit, but I'm going to ask you to find a comfortable position. And then staying in that position, I'll ask you to listen for your response after each of the statements that I make. And I'll leave about 5 seconds between each one. So if you choose, please go ahead and find that comfortable position, and I'll go ahead and read what I've got. I should note here that some of the things I'll be saying strike you a little odd. It's okay. It doesn't have to be totally logical. Feel the hair touching your head. Feel your belly rising and falling as you breathe. Feel the space between your eyes. Feel the distance between your ears. Feel your breath touching the back of your eyes while you inhale. Notice your arms touching your body. Feel the bottoms of your feet. Imagine a beautiful day at the beach. Notice the position of your tongue in your mouth. Feel how one arm is more relaxed than the other. Notice any tightness in your left thigh. Imagine what it would feel like to float on a cloud. Imagine what it would feel like to be stuck in molasses. Imagine floating in warm water. Feel your face getting soft. Imagine a beautiful flower. So as we bring this to a close, I invite you to simply notice your breathing and how your body does what it needs to do. And then I'll invite you to come back into the room. All right. Well, thank you for engaging in that. I think in some ways that was basically doing a good body and emotion scan and gives us an opportunity just to quiet ourselves and just pay attention to some of those minute things going on in our bodies and our minds and our spirits that we sometimes just take for granted or don't notice. So I hope that was of some use to you. I'd be interested in people's responses in the chat box if you choose. So mindfulness itself is not so much about what you choose to focus on, but the quality of the awareness that you bring. And I want to just make a comment here. There are certain things that mindfulness is not. It's not about having a blank mind. It's not about changing your experience. It's not about escaping anything, including pain. It's certainly not about becoming emotionless or seeking bliss or withdrawing. And it's not the same as relaxation either, or even not the same as meditation. Certainly meditation is a form of mindfulness, but mindfulness is something we can all practice at all times and do, but perhaps do it less than maybe is advantageous. So it can show us what's happening in our bodies, our emotions, our minds, in the world, and in this way we can avoid harming ourselves and others. And to me, this is a way of remaining generous, remaining compassionate, continuing to live peacefully as possible in our world. And so mindfulness, I think, is a catalyst for us to live this way. But one of the things that's also very interesting, I think, is that when we do live this way, it becomes something that gets transmittable to other people. They notice, and I'm talking about clients here as well as other people in your lives. They can sense your own centeredness, your own awareness, your own ability to be the calm in the storm. Not that you can't also have anxiety, but there's something about that that can be really transformative. So what are we experiencing? How do we name it? Well, it's trauma. This is trauma for sure. There are lots of different kinds of trauma. I know that all of you who work in behavioral health recognize that being trauma-informed and recovery-oriented is really, really a critical perspective to take. One of the things that comes up commonly in definitions of trauma is this word overwhelm, that the traumatic event and our response to the traumatic event just becomes overwhelming. And it's overwhelming in our physiology, it's overwhelming in our whole bio, psycho, social, spiritual, communal selves. So yeah, we can call this trauma. And of course, for some people, including ourselves, this is just layered onto a lot of other trauma that we were experiencing before this. And then of course, sometimes layered onto the early childhood trauma that was shaped who we are and how we view the world in many ways, or at least it was something that we had to work to find recovery around. So let's call it trauma for what it is and recognize it as such. And so as such, your brain is not operating properly. And when I say your brain, I don't mean you individual. Well, yes, I do, but it's mine too. All of our brains are not operating properly at this time, which makes you and I completely normal people. This is what's happening during these times. And I'm sure you've probably been able to notice your own mind not operating quite in the way. This is a meme that I really enjoy. It divides your health into, or your life into sleeping, into working, into eating, and then about a third of your life is basically looking for things you had just a minute ago. I can speak for myself that there's real truth in that. Again, Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky says, no matter the cause, the sensation of overwhelm and the impact that it has on your ability to focus and make your way through the world can be very disorienting or even debilitating. So just a few examples. There is a guy who I know who's actually married to my wife. And I know that recently he put a kettle of water on the stove and wanted to heat it up. And he put it on the back burner and he turned on the stove to high, but he happened to do that on the front burner and came back a few moments later and was wondering why the water wasn't getting hotter and why he was having this wave of heat coming off this other burner. These things happen all the time. They've already happened to me today. Certainly, we know that you probably do have this situation of walking into a room having clearly understood what it is you walked into that room for 3 seconds ago, but then you get there and you're totally befuddled. Or you're in a conversation and all of a sudden you have trouble finding words. And it's not like you don't know how to speak. It's just that our minds are kind of on another level of operation that doesn't allow us to recall things that often come so simply in other times. So I bet you have your own examples, and you don't need to share them if you want, but I think that's a pretty common kind of thing. Another frame that we can look on what's happening is that we are all experiencing deep grief. And I was very moved by an article that perhaps some of you have read as well. It was actually an interview in the Harvard Business Review with David Kessler. David Kessler being somebody who has done a lot of writing and research around trauma, grief, has done a lot of writing with, in the past with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who many of you know as someone who was very instrumental in helping us come to terms with understanding death and dying. But in this interview, he's asked, so what is it that we're experiencing? And why is it grief? And he says, well, we're feeling this as a number of different griefs. One, the world's changed, and we know that this is temporary, and yet it doesn't feel that way. It feels like forever. And we realize that things will be different afterward, just like after 9/11, things changed. And yet somewhat came back to normal. But this whole loss of normalcy during this time and the fears that come with economic toll and deprivation and loss of connection really hits us hard. And we're grieving. We're grieving all of these losses collectively and individually. And then he says, one way that we can try to manage this grief is to understand the fact that grief does have different stages to it. And he's very quick to say, this is not a linear process, and he doesn't say it this way, but actually these stages are kind of convenient fictions in many ways. And we can experience them in a variety of ways, sometimes all at once it seems. But he talks about the denial in which we hear ourselves, especially early on, a few weeks, months ago, we were saying, this virus won't affect us. It's over there. And then there's anger about, you're making me stay home and taking away my activities. I can't play sports anymore. I can't do this and that. And then there's bargaining. Okay, I'll do it, but only for a time, and things will get better, right? And then there's kind of deep sadness that begins to set in because we don't know when this will end. We don't know where this is all heading to. And then acceptance looks more like, this is happening. And it's really mindfulness. It's mindful that this is what is, and I'm just going to have to embrace it, and in terms of having to figuring out how to move forward. Acceptance, as you might imagine, he says, is where the power lies. And to find control and acceptance examples include, I can wash my hands, I can wear a mask, I can keep at a safe distance, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there is some unveilings and things that are coming about, too, as a result of this that I think provide us with a little bit sort of better news. And that is, I think, probably most of us are really recognizing the importance of connection with people and with the earth. And we are often reconnecting during times like this in new ways, obviously on the internet more than in person, but also I think in deeper ways. I think there are conversations that I've been having and others have been having that I've heard where we're talking with people at a deeper level. The trivia isn't quite so important, or some things are more trivial than we might have thought them to be at some time. So if you aren't able to tell your story to another human, which is the best way we can do, especially if that human listens, we can certainly still reconnect through other means. Examples here being journaling, painting, making graphic novels, going to the woods, talking to the trees, music, whatever. This is also, I would say, a time that while we're feeling overwhelmed, there's also a certain coming alive that happens in times like these. And I'm curious if any of you would be willing to chat or type in the chat box just ways in which you've noticed for yourself or for others, how there's been this sort of reinvigoration or this new awareness or heightened kind of energy and aliveness that you've been experiencing. I am glancing here at the chat box a little bit and see that some of you are definitely in times of deep hurt, and I appreciate your sharing that. I think we need to share that. And so again, if you wish, I'm seeing here some comments about reconnecting in different ways. You're noticing you're breathing more. You're finally getting a sense of the slowdown. Yeah. People have been more grateful. Your spiritual and social life is maybe taken on more qualities, more yoga, more reading, more hiking, biking. Yeah. More emotional willingness to share emotions, absolutely. And an appreciation, a deep gratitude for waking up and to a new day. And digging into chakra, yeah, staying in contact. So all of these and others, I think, are ways that we can recognize that there's a both-and quality to our experience, and a lot of it's not good, and it's very hard and sad, and we're grieving. And there is another part that we're realizing that our own deeper humanity is being revealed as well. More singing and praying, yeah, very nice, very nice. So what are we talking about here? What is self-care? I'm going to suggest to you that it's not a thing per se. It's many things. It's the sum total of hundreds of thousands of small actions and attitudes and ways of being in the world. And so we all are already doing lots and lots to take care of ourselves. We do this just naturally. But in times like these, I think we can be even more aware of some of the things that you just mentioned in the chat box, that these seemingly small actions make a huge difference. Another way to think about it is it's a very intentional way of living by which our values, our attitudes, and our actions are integrated into our day-to-day routines. Esther Abraham Hicks says, when you are in alignment with who you really are, you cannot help but uplift those with whom you come in contact. And so self-care is actually a social act as well. And so it is for the benefit of oneself, but also for others. I offer you a reminder here that oftentimes when we think about self-care, people have all kinds of great ideas for how we should take care of ourselves, and you can go on the internet and find them all. In fact, I'll be presenting some. But the truth of the matter is that each of us has an individualized self-care approach and plan, and that's how it needs to be. And you already know within what's going to motivate you and help you in your own way of going about your self-care. And one of the things I'll just say that some people develop a self-care kind of strategy that has a fair amount of scheduling to it, and it's predictable. And I think for many people that's really, really helpful in times like these. For others of you, your self-care is a little more fluid, and it's kind of based on what's meeting you in the moment and what you might do. And so your toolbox is full of lots of possibilities, including taking time to read or meditate or to take a walk, that kind of thing. So there are many ways that we can go about this. There's certainly no one way. But I want to just offer you something. I'm going to bet that most of you are familiar with motivational interviewing, which is something I do a lot of training around. But here's a little brief motivational exercise maybe that you can do for yourself. If I were to say to you, if you were to do a little more exercising or eat a little more healthfully or let go of the toxic stress you experience or whatever it is, fill in the blank, why might you do that? What would be some reasons for you to do that? How would it benefit you? And you can answer that. You have those answers within, right? You might often also ask yourself, how important is this, relatively speaking, in this time? And who can help me with that? Who can support me in that? These are, and how would I go about it? What would work for me? And so this is knowing that we have inside ourselves, if we just do that exploring of what's going to be the best plan for us in any given moment. And let's face it, those plans will change from day to day, maybe even more frequently. Yeah, it's inside you already. You don't have to go shopping for it, and Amazon won't deliver you a self-care plan. What self-care is it's not about being selfish. And I know that we're tempted oftentimes because we're helping people to really see ourselves as either not having the time or feeling like we don't deserve to take time to really take care of ourselves. Audre Lorde is somebody who took that even further, and I love this quote. She says, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgent. It is self-preservation," and goes on to say that and it's an act of political warfare. Now, I will say, as for me, that doesn't resonate in the same way, but if I'm Audre Lorde or I'm a person, in her case, a black woman, feminist, warrior, as she self-describes, lesbian, who has been pushed back by societal norms in so many ways, it is, in fact, a political activity. It's a way of saying, see me, hear me, and I am going to be here, and I'm going to take care of myself so I can make a difference as well as in changing systems and lives. So it's not selfish. It's actually, if anything, a way of being a good steward of this body, mind, and spirit we've been given. Self-care is also not about doing more. It's not this idea of adding more to a to-do list. Some of you know the writing of Thomas Merton, who says the rush and pressure of modern life, and he wrote this in the 1960s, I believe, are a form, perhaps the most common form, of its innate violence. So our busyness, our doing things, even the busyness of doing good and trying to meet everybody's needs, it is in itself a way of violating who we want to be in the world. And when we get caught up in that busyness, we actually become instruments of violence. Not that we intentionally do that, but we don't any longer listen well or slow down long enough, or we assume what the people need and all of these things. So there's a great danger in allowing ourselves to get overly busy. So what does this list include? Well, here is a list that you can get from the internet, but I thought these were interesting ones, some good tips, and I'm not going to go into them in great detail, but finding a way to prioritize, doing what has to be done, is certainly critically important in this time. To breathe, be aware of your breathing, be meditating, whatever form that takes for you, finding stillness in your life, being easy and forgiving to yourself, and getting good rest, getting good care, remembering that you, the real you, isn't going to change in the midst of this, and also learning to detach in a healthy kind of way and kind of become friends with uncertainty. Turns out that life is uncertain even when there's not a pandemic, so there's something really healthy about doing this, and also trusting that this too shall pass. So we're going to do a little quick switch of a slide set here because, oh, that was very switchy. Thank you to Vanessa in the background. So I have a friend and colleague, former colleague, who I heard her say this recently: this too shall pass, maybe like a kidney stone, but it will pass. I just couldn't leave that out of this presentation. So I came across this meme recently, and I'll interpret it so you don't have to look too carefully at it, but I thought it was a whimsical way of thinking about the importance of our prioritizing things. Basically, it's saying that the things that are still important and even have become more important are coffee and the internet. The things that have become much more important are sweatpants The things that have become much less important include shaving and wearing a bra, and probably lots of other things we could put in there. But the truth of the matter is that we are reshaping our priorities during times like these. And I think that's actually a very healthy and important thing to do. And then the trick will be, can we carry that into our lives beyond this present moment? Happy for having you add more things that you're either increasing or letting go of here. I also came across an article by Anna Rowley about becoming a self-care activist during tough times. And she talks about managing boundaries and not confusing boundaries with selfishness or being narcissistic, but recognizing that you need to be clear where you stop and where others start, and recognize that we do need boundaries. And she talks also about these images. Sometimes with some people we need a moat. There's just no crossing without great difficulty. Sometimes it's a door or a gate where you still have control over whether that person comes in or out of your life. And then there are more fluid boundaries, like a fence that, yes, it's a boundary, but it would be easy to crawl through or jump over. And for many of us, we have those kinds of boundaries with friends, but there's still something there that marks that boundary. She also talks about saying no to toxic relationships and just being clear that what you don't need in your life right now is people who pull you down so much as people who lift you up. And then she also talks about questioning your own self-talk. What are you saying to yourself during these times? Are there a lot of shoulds, a lot of nevers, a lot of can'ts, or is it more being a good health coach to yourself and allowing yourself to hear messages that I can do this and I am capable and I will do what I can and it's all good enough? These are the kinds of self-talk things that I think are important. And then the idea of owning your own experience and avoidance of things or diminishing things or trying to pose, if you will, as somebody that you're not. And just being who you are. That can be such a transformative and enriching experience. No need to impress anybody. Another thing I came across recently coming from the CDC, and, I just think, again, good advice. Focus on what you can control. Let go of what you can't control is always a good life piece of wisdom to look at. And then this piece about limiting exposure to social media and news sources. What I would add to that is each of us have different thresholds for that. It certainly is important for connecting and for becoming informed. But it goes without saying that there's a whole lot out there today in social media and on news sources that is, shall we say, less than truthful, that's outright misleading, that's outright, frankly, galling. And we need to have the ability to discern what is truth-telling and what is not. And so I know you all know that, but I feel like it needs to be said because there's a lot out there that can mislead us and misinform us. So I'd ask you to type, I'm guessing many of you are familiar with these four fellows, and I'm wondering if you would type in the chat box what might be problematic about the way that they are currently positioned in the time of this pandemic. What are some concerns you have about just the way they're in the world? So yes, they're not 6 feet apart. Nor are they 16 feet apart, which I'm sure some of you are hearing that we maybe need to be thinking more 16 or 20 feet apart, frankly, given what the research is showing us. But they're too close to each other. They're not wearing face masks. And Paul has no shoes. Yeah, what's that about? Don't walk around barefoot in these times. And so my suggestion to you is don't do this. That said, do this. This is a good idea. And I'm sure if there's any double entendre here, I'm sure you're picking up on it. But do create that distance, but also the ability to still be safe and social in the world. And the other thing I would say is also it's important to get back to basics. Get back to the things that you know, and you don't need to be reminded, but I'll remind you anyway, that are so, so important. And this is one of those things I keep on my desktop, on my laptop, because it's a good reminder to eat well, move daily, especially if you are a sitter, hydrate often, drink lots of water, sleep lots, love yourself and others, and continue to repeat this for life. I love the stark simplicity of this and the reminder. It's interesting to me, it's not that we don't know these things, but it's that we don't know these things in certain times when we get distracted. And so we need this repetition, I think. Another thing to think about is taking time to do a compassionate body scan, meaning looking at yourself lovingly and looking at your body in particular lovingly and noticing what happens. Those of you who know trauma and its impact know the work of Bessel van der Kolk and The Body Keeps the Score and other writers. Our bodies are the ones who hold trauma, or they express and react to the stress that we hold. And so notice if you're having digestive problems or tension headaches or just an elevated heart rate or sweating or your skin feels a little clammy, whatever it is, notice how your body itself is responding to the stress that we're having. And then consider breathing and doing things with movement and breathing to try to bring them to a more normal state of being. There's also this notion of affectionate breathing and a practice that helps us ground ourselves when we're feeling overwhelmed. I'm going to invite you one more time to just do a very brief exercise around this and ask you to take a comfortable position if you would. And I'm just going to lead you through a few simple steps of compassionate breathing. I'm sorry, affectionate breathing, same thing. So you might let your eyes gently close, or you can let them partially be open or fully open, whatever is comfortable for you. And just take a few slow, easy breaths, releasing any unnecessary tension in your body. So take a moment to do that if you would. And then you might place your hand over your heart or another soothing place if you want, just to remind yourself that you're being affectionate to yourself. And then begin to notice your breathing in your body and feeling your body breath in, breathe in, and feeling your body breathe out. And just noticing, don't even think about anything else, just let your body breathe you. Just noticing that in and out. And then perhaps noticing how your body is nourished on the in-breath and how it relaxes on the out-breath. You might also just take time to notice the rhythm of your breathing, and one image that you might think about as your breathing being like the movement of the sea, of the coming and going of the wave action, and this constant rhythmic kind of back and forth, in and out. And I'm going to end there. I'm noticing time and also just wanted to provide a taste of that. But again, I think that these are things we can recognize can be very helpful. There are also, again, things coming out on the internet, right? Daily quarantine questions. We can ask ourselves interesting questions. We can do this at the dinner table if we have friends or over the internet. What are you grateful for today? Who are you connecting with? Who's connecting with you? What are you willing and able to let go of today? What are you doing to get outside to the best of your ability and move your body and notice beauty in the earth and in relationships? You might even take it further to ask yourself, what does this all mean to you? What's the gift of this moment? What are the strengths that you're tapping into during this time? That last question, what are you proud of in your response to this difficult time? And I actually invite you in the chat box to respond to that and share with one another, what are you proud of in your response to this difficult time? This is not bragging. This is seeing things as they are and putting it out there. What are you finding that you feel like is something you feel good about? So while you're doing that, I'm going to continue moving on. I will say, yes, getting up every morning and trying your best, that's great. I have a little quiz for you, and if you don't mind, let me look at a few notes and then we'll go to the quiz. So appreciation certainly of time and what it gives us, and asking for help, being proud of that, absolutely, absolutely. I'm proud of accepting that I must stay away from my kids and grandkids. Yeah. Spending more time with your own child, for those of you who can do that. Yeah. You're being more creative. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. And just staying positive. All of these things and more are things that we can be very proud of. Family time. Yep. Deepening our own discovery of ourselves and who we are and our values and what's important to us and more. So if you would, I'm going to ask you to switch your attention a little bit because I have a quiz for you. And the first question is, what is the only sea on Earth with no coastline? This is not a trick question, but there is a sea on Earth that has absolutely no coastlines, and I will be very proud of you if you know the answer. Of course, I don't want to give you enough time to Google it because that would defeat the purpose, but there's some good guesses here, the Red and Dead Sea. It turns out that it's the Sargasso Sea. It's in the North Atlantic, Central Atlantic, and it turns out that I never knew this before. I just discovered this. This is why I'm sharing it with you. But it is defined only by ocean currents, and it's a patch of ocean named for this free-floating seaweed called sargassum. There's a picture of it. And sadly, it's also a plastic pollution place because lots and lots of plastics get gathered up into this area. But who knew about the Sargasso Sea? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. What European country shares a border with Brazil? Anybody know that? I'll give a moment for a guess. Okay, none. You think I'm pulling your leg here, don't you? It turns out that French Guiana is actually a part of France. They actually use the euro in French Guiana, and it's considered a part of under French rule, and it does border Brazil. So didn't know that one until recently either. And then one more question. What is the easternmost state in the United States? Anybody know? I hope these come up on Jeopardy tonight. Yeah. So good guesses. Maine, Florida. This is a trick question. You are so true. That is so true. Puerto Rico. So it turns out that Alaska is the easternmost state in the United States. Alaska is also the westernmost state and the northernmost state in the 50 U.S. states. And the reason for this being, if you're willing to buy my logic, is that the international date line actually is what we typically use to think about the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere. And there are a part of the Aleutian chain of islands in Alaska that actually are on the other side of the international date line and therefore are the easternmost part of the U.S., if you buy that. So what's the point? Why even these ridiculous quiz questions? Well, it turns out that we need to get away from all of this sometimes. We need to get out of our heads. We need to escape. We need to go somewhere where we can just have some respite. And so I think of that in terms of a balancing act. And I'm just going to offer up here in the time we have a few images of ways that we can balance. Very briefly here, Glennon Doyle talks about how life is both brutal and how life is also beautiful. So she's coined a balancing act word called brutiful. Life is brutiful, and you can learn more from that if you want. But I think this is a wonderful time for us to balance our lives with things, somebody mentioned being more creative, of getting that guitar or that instrument out of its case and playing it again. We know that music itself, making music itself, is incredibly therapeutic for the entire soul. And if you're not a musician, it doesn't mean you can't make music. You can play the triangle, or you could play a drum. Then again, you could also play the bagpipes. But okay, just kidding about that one. Sorry if I offended any of you. But we can also listen to music. And I don't know about you. I know very few people who don't enjoy listening to music, but as you'll note, these are 5 musicians who we lost very recently related to COVID-19 symptoms. So there are obviously a lot more things we can listen to, but this is another way we can create balance in our lives. And we can practice wonder. We can practice wonder about what nature gives us and affords us. We can play games. It's fine. We can play sorry. I think that's appropriate for the times. Even more appropriate might be pandemic. But if none of that appeals to you, then you can watch a movie. I was thinking The Sound of Music for some reason, and then I realized that, yeah, there's a lot of happiness in The Sound of Music, but there's also the Nazis chasing this family up into the Alps. So, yeah, maybe not. But it's really, truly a time for connection as well. So awareness, balance, and connecting and recognizing we are in this together, even though we are being disproportionately affected by it all. And this is an image all too common these days, of course, in how we're having to find ways to be connected in new and safer ways. And then as we come to a close, I want to introduce you to a few resources. The Age of Overwhelm I've already mentioned. In it, Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky, who wrote this before the pandemic, but she talks about these kind of 5 major ways of considering how that we can deal with overwhelm. And I do recommend the book to you if you're interested. There are certainly others. The thing about Laura's books is that she makes them chock full of New Yorker cartoons like this one. So that's one reason to pick it up. But some other books might be of interest to you. The Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook, Trauma Stewardship, A Paradise Built in Hell, where Rebecca Solnit talks about resilience in the time of tragedy and things like that. And then I thought I should definitely offer you an example of a self-care plan. I like Ignacio's plan myself. I think it's colorful and cool, and it kind of covers all the bases. You don't have to have a written plan, but you might want to. Just a 4-fold Franciscan blessing, which I tend to use in a lot of the teaching and training I do. I think it's just a nice way of wrapping up this time today together. So I'll read it to you. May you all be blessed with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships so that you will live deep in your heart. May you be blessed with anger at injustice, oppression, exploitation of people in the earth so that you will work for justice, equity, and peace. And may you be blessed with tears to shed for those who suffer so that you will reach out your hand to comfort them and change their pain into joy. And may you be blessed with the foolishness to think that you can make a difference in the world so that you will do the things which others say cannot be done. And I'll leave you with these 2 wonderful quotes and say thank you very, very much, all of you, for participating, for writing in the chat box. I'm sorry if I missed your comments. I'll look back over them, and others can too. And so, like I said, we can leave this up for a few minutes if you want to keep typing, but I just want to formally say thank you so much for your attention, and hope this has been of some value to you as you think about your own sense of self-care, self-compassion in these truly very traumatizing and overwhelming times.